everyone. In this video, we're going to begin talking about tissues. So far, we've considered cells, the model cell, and then the idea that most cells in the body really don't match up with the model cell. They don't all have the same organelles. Some organelles are missing. Certain capabilities of the cell are present or absent, such as the cell's ability to reproduce or not reproduce. The functions of the cell can vary, such as red blood cells are purposed to carry oxygen, and so therefore they don't have a lot of organelles. But then we think of some other types of cells that have everything because they have to do a lot of work, cellular work. So when we think about those cells, we can group them together based on type and function. And so when we think of tissues, we generally classify tissues in 4 ways. We have epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and neural tissue. So what we actually find as we think about tissues being the transition from talking about cells to talking about organs and body systems is that most body systems are going to have multiple types of tissue, if not all the types of tissue. So it's sort of like an intermediate level of organization between cells and organs. And really what we're going to do is sort of break down the different types of tissue in this video, and then we'll expand on some types in some other videos. First, we'll draw sort of a conglomerate of all the different types of tissue in one drawing, just to sort of show the collaboration between the cells that's necessary for building the body. So first we have epithelial tissue. So we could sort of envision that this is like this is a passageway of some kind. Think of the respiratory tract, think of the digestive tract, something of that nature. And so there'll be sort of a tube, and there's a hollow middle. So we'll call that a passageway. And then we have a lining of cells, and that would be the epithelial tissue. Generally, epithelial tissue is layers of cells that cover internal and external structures. So we're thinking about exposed surfaces such as the skin, internal passageways as we mentioned, such as the GI tract or the respiratory tract, and even chambers like the chambers of the heart. We also find often that epithelial tissue or epithelial cells are associated with glands. So glands are structures that produce fluid secretion such as mucus. And they could be attached to epithelial cells, as in we could sort of draw them in between these epithelial cells we have here, or they could be derived from epithelia, and that way we sort of take the epithelial tissue, we make a little, sort of a little pit, and the gland is that pit of epithelial tissue that secretes some type of fluid. And we'll actually see both types as we consider some of the organs and the organ systems and what their purposes are. The next type of tissue is connective tissue, and I like to think of connective tissue as filler. So a lot of times it just fills the spaces in between other structures, such as between the epithelial tissue and muscle tissue, but also it has some important functions of its own, such as storage of energy. It has cells that store fat. It also is responsible for transport of materials throughout the body. So this would be things like blood is an example of connective tissue in that way. And also it's responsible for structural support. So sometimes it is the primary tissue of a body system, such as bones. Bones are made entirely of connective tissue. Next we have muscle tissue. So muscle tissue is basically responsible for movement. So we're talking about largely body movement, like walking from point A to point B, but also movement of materials throughout the body occurs because of sometimes muscle contraction. So the cells are specialized for contraction. So basically what we're talking about is a relationship between two cytoskeleton proteins, actin, myosin, that interact with each other in order to cause the muscle to change shape and size to perform this function that we call contraction. So there are 3 types of muscle tissue. They are skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. We've drawn smooth muscle cells in the picture, so we'll generally give them this almond sort of shape. Now there are 2 basic properties of muscle tissue that are worth noting. One is whether or not they're under voluntary control. So voluntary really means that there's conscious control available. So you could think about contracting your bicep and then you could contract your bicep. Whereas if you think about digestion of food and the movement of materials through the digestive tract, you can't think about squeezing the esophagus to push food down, or squeezing the small intestine to transport materials through the tube that it is. So in those cases, there's not voluntary control, so we just call it involuntary. So skeletal muscle is under voluntary control, and cardiac muscle and smooth muscle are involuntary. The other property we commonly discuss with regard to muscle tissue is whether or not it is striated. So striated refers to a linear arrangement of the actin and myosin. So if the particular tissue type is striated, then it has a linear arrangement, and that would be skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle are both striated. And smooth muscle is non-striated, meaning it still contains actin and myosin. They're just not presented in a linear arrangement. And the final type of tissue is neural tissue. Neural tissue is responsible for conduction of electrical impulses from one part of the body to another. So it's made up of neurons, which are basically like nerve cells or functional unit of the nervous system, and neuroglia, which are the supporting cells, of which there are several types. We can have neurons that communicate with other neurons, or we can have neurons that communicate with other types of cells, such as muscle cells or glands. So I think that in terms of an overview of tissues, the thing that's really important to notice is that all of these tissues will have to work together cooperatively in order for body functions to occur. And so what we're going to do is explore a little bit more about epithelial tissue and connective tissue to get a better understanding of the properties of those tissues, and in the case of connective tissue, some of the subtypes of connective tissue. But really what we want to focus on is, as we discover each of the different body systems, what tissues are present, how they're organized, why those particular tissues are present, and what their purpose is in terms of helping that body system perform its particular function. So I hope you enjoyed the overview. Thanks for watching.